At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Marco Grunhagen, who is the Lumpkin Distinguished Professor of Entrepreneurship. He is responsible for coordinating the events of this week in support of Global Entrepreneurship Week. Dr. Grunhagen will introduce this evening's panel presenters.
Thank you, Dr. Knoll. Good evening, everybody. As I was just introduced, my name is Dr. Marco Grunhagen. I'm the Lumpkin Distinguished Professor of Entrepreneurship here in the School of Business at EIU, and your host for the evening. Tonight's event is held during Global Entrepreneurship Week, a globally designated week of celebration of the entrepreneurial spirit, and we're very proud to host two hallmark events for the second year here in the School of Business during this special week. It allows us to showcase the expertise and the contributions that the study of business in general and of entrepreneurial ventures in particular contributes to the local, the national, and even the global economy. This is the second year that we're operating our new minor in entrepreneurship, a campus-wide minor housed in the School of Business, and we're very encouraged by over 40 students from across the EIU campus who have already chosen entrepreneurship as their minor concentration. The first of this year's events was held last night in this same auditorium and focused on green jobs in rural Illinois. Tonight's event is about franchising, which has become one of the preeminent engines of growth, not only for the global economy, but it has become a hallmark of the U.S. economy, and it remains one of the mainstays of local rural economies, with the ubiquitous presence of franchised fast food restaurants, hotels, car repair garages, and more recently of franchised laundromats and even funeral homes. In short, franchising is with us for the long haul, and it is becoming increasingly a part of economies across the globe. And I wanted to show you a slide from a recent article in the Journal of Retailing that shows a comparison of the impact of franchising across different countries around the globe. And the first line here is the United States, where franchising accounts for over 40% of the retailing sector, for $2.1 trillion of our GDP, employs 18 million people, and accounts for almost 1 million outlets through about 3,000 franchise systems. We also have with us tonight the president or the chair of the local SCORE chapter, and SCORE is involved in providing free and confidential counseling for businesses, for local businesses, and there are handouts that we're going to place somewhere at the exits for attendees to grab. Academic research on franchising goes back for over 4 decades, and increasingly the entrepreneurial components of franchising have received attention, both in academia and in industry. It's no secret that the founding franchisors, such as Ray Kroc or Dave Thomas, were entrepreneurs through and through. Similarly, many franchisees show entrepreneurial traits as they grow their businesses, come up with innovative new ideas, such as Subway's $5 footlong, which was the creation of a Florida franchisees, despite the safety net provided by the franchise system behind them. And finally, in many franchise systems, franchisees find areas that remain completely unregulated by the system, such as HR incentive systems and advancement opportunities, despite of the many regulations inherent to franchise systems. We have here with us tonight a panel of 5 experts who are going to offer their perspectives on franchising from a variety of vantage points. The idea of the panel is to provide insights into franchising from the perspectives of the franchisor, the company behind the system, if you will, the franchisee, the owner of individual units, and players that become part of the equation at various points throughout the life of a franchise, either in the form of a regulatory agency or in the form of legal representation when such a party is needed. Hence, we have with us tonight to represent these angles Mr. William Guzik, the Executive Vice President and CFO of Midas International. We have Mrs. Cassandra Karamy, the Assistant Attorney General for the Franchise Bureau of the State of Illinois. Mr. Kevin Traub, a franchisee with Dairy Queen International from Jerseyville, Illinois. Mrs. Doris Carter, franchise attorney with Carter and Taney Attorneys at Law from Wheaton, Illinois. And Mr. John Inyard, our esteemed mayor of Charleston and also a franchisee of Midas International. We also brought in a moderator, one of my valued franchise colleagues, Dr. Steve Michael from the University of Illinois. Steve and I are part of the same tight-knit circle of franchise scholars, and our friendship goes back a number of years. Interestingly, every time we hang out, we seem to end up in some bar in some city somewhere around the globe, from Steve's favorite Indian restaurants to a pub in London to most recently a club behind Boston's Fenway Park. Steve is one of the most recognized academics in the field of franchising research. He received his PhD in business economics from Harvard, is professor of management at the University of Illinois, associate editor of the Journal of Management, and I'm excited to have him here with us tonight as our moderator for this panel. Steve?
Thank you very much. Good evening. Let's try that again. Good evening. Good to hear you. Glad you're out there. We were wondering for a minute up here. Glad you came. Happy Entrepreneurship Week to each and every one of you. Thank you, Mr. Provost, Madam Chair. Thank you very much to the Lumpkin family and the hospitality of Eastern Illinois. I'm glad to be here. Most of all, I want to thank in advance, and we'll thank them also later, for their time and talent of our amazing all-star panel up here to my left. Let's thank them in advance, shall we? A couple of ground rules for conversation, and then we'll get to the meat of things, or we'll, as they say, we'll get to the beef. We'd like to encourage you to ask questions. We'd like to encourage you to ask questions, however, with legible handwriting on index cards, and those will come forward. By the way, I assume that when someone takes your index card, you'll be offered another one should you be the typical inquisitive student who will have multiple questions. We do ask that you give, that as we will ask a number of questions, we let each of our respondents have their turn with the question, and if for some reason you have to excuse yourself, and students sometimes do, please be sure to let all of our interlocutors have their remarks before you leave. So leave in between questions is what I'm saying, and not in between speakers. That's a nice courtesy if you can do so and if your schedule permits. A couple of remarks just about franchising more generally. Franchising is, without a doubt, one of the fastest growing industrial organizational forms present in the global economy today. There are over 1 million franchisees worldwide at a minimum. Franchising is an organizational form. That is to say, it's a way of doing business. Some might use the term business model as a way that can be adapted across multiple and distinct industry sectors. I dare say that every one of you in this room, if you're students like my students in Champaign, that nary a week has gone by without some visit to a franchised operation, perhaps a restaurant, perhaps you had a blizzard. If you're visiting an auto repair shop on a weekly basis, it isn't a Midas. That's the one joke I have. But it might be one of his competitors. Franchising is also usefully thought of as offering from the developer of a person with a good idea in the service sector, offering two things, offering a brand name and a production technology. Now, since you're students, you've heard the term production technology before because you've all studied economics, but I point out to you that's a fancy way, perhaps, of saying a blueprint, a design, an operating manual, a way to get the work done. Dairy Queen was an innovator. When ice cream was first developed, it was served typically at about 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is to say, it was hard ice cream. However, the founders of Dairy Queen thought that it was tastier to serve as it came straight out of the mixing machine, i.e. at about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. They had to develop some technology to do that. Now, there's a technology in the sense of science there, but there's also a science to learning to operate a restaurant at the volumes that it has to operate at to be a successful franchise, say a McDonald's or a Dairy Queen. There's a technology to running a repair shop. They're fixing cars. So behind that is a technology, a how to do business. And in front of that, of course, is this familiar trademark that we all know so well, that we see from the highways, that we see in the downtowns. That's a good way, I find, to think about franchising, the way I like to introduce it to people. We have with us today a distinguished panel, and rather than adding any further remarks, let me just ask them perhaps the most important question. Each of you as students are seeking to find your place in the world. I'd like to ask each of our panelists how they found their place in the franchising world. how did you get to the place you are now? How did you become a business owner, a franchisee, a counselor to franchisees as an attorney? Perhaps we can start from left to right. So if I could start with Kevin. Yeah. Sorry.
I got started in 1987. Bought the Dairy Queen from a gentleman that had bought it from my dad in 1982. And actually, I never really aspired to be a Dairy Queen operator. I grew up in the Dairy Queen business and felt as if there was other things out there besides the family business. And I went to Lakeland College in Mattoon, took broadcasting classes, and was working at the radio station in Jerseyville, Illinois. And the past owner of the Dairy Queen came in and asked if I wanted to get into the Dairy Queen business, or back into the Dairy Queen business. And after some careful consideration and some discussions with my dad, who was still in the business at the time, but in another community, we decided to get into the Dairy Queen business for two reasons. One, I had a past background in Dairy Queen, having grown up in the business, and two, it was a financial opportunity to provide for my family in a better fashion. I knew the business. I knew the community as I was working there. I'd lived there, went to high school there. So that's how I ended up. It was kind of actually it was my backup plan, being in the Dairy Queen business. Franchising with the Dairy Queen system has changed drastically over the years. It's not anything like it was when I got into the business, in that I went to the bank and had nothing more than a promise and a handshake that I promised that I could do the job, pay the bills, and did it all on a handshake and my dad's co-signature on the loan. So today, if you've got to have nearly $750,000 in net assets and $400,000 in liquid assets, just to be considered to get into the Dairy Queen business. So I don't think I could get into the Dairy Queen business today the same way that I did before. So it was kind of I don't want to call it a backdoor approach to the franchise business, but something that I didn't expect to end up being involved with, but nonetheless did, and been doing it for 24 years now. So I guess we've been doing something right for the duration. So that's how I got there.
There's a common theme here because my dad was involved a little bit on my project as well. In about 1980, after I graduated from high school, I took off for Lakeland College in their automotive program, and felt that I wanted to be a technician, automotive technician. And I found that working on cars was a lot of work, and getting dirty was okay, but I also realized that I wanted to own my own business, but I felt like I wanted to stay in a field that I knew. I spent about 7 years working in a couple of other shops before I had the opportunity to buy the franchise here in Charleston. Backing up a little bit, I had grown up in a business, in a family business. My dad was in the retail shoe business downtown here in Charleston, and a store that his dad had started in 1921. So there was business in our family for a long time, and I knew that I watched my dad work hard and call his own shots for the most part, and I knew that business was probably somewhere in my master plan. But in 1989, the Midas franchise here in Charleston had been open for about 1.5 years, and it was for sale. And I convinced my dad to loan me a little money so that I could make it look like I had more money, and went to the bank and borrowed a lot more money. Nothing like the numbers that they talk about today, obviously, but found myself self-employed with one employee, and still doing much of the automotive work myself. Found that business grew, and I added an employee each year for about the next 4 years, and then in about 1996, on April Fool's Day, no less, I bought my second shop in Mattoon. And so between the two stores, now what was once a two-man operation is 22 full-time employees, and pretty large operation where we probably see between the two stores close to 80 to 100 customers a day. So it's really been a good ride, but as Straub indicated, it's a different business than I got into as well. When I was getting into the Midas business, we were muffler and brake, Midas Muffler and Brake, formerly Midas Muffler. We were actually one of the first franchises in the automotive business in 1956, I believe we were founded, and offering just a lifetime muffler. And so now we're a full-line automotive repair shop. We do quick oil change service. We sell tires. We do diagnostic work. So it's a totally different business, very much like what's happened to your business. Involves a lot more equipment, a lot more capital, a lot more technical training, and it's a challenge every day.
When I went to law school, there were no courses on franchise law, and I don't think I ever heard the word franchise law in law school. And in fact, when I was a business student at U of I never heard the word franchise either back when I was there. But I kind of fell into franchising. After doing something else for the first 5 years of my law practice, I decided I wanted to go work for a corporation. With my business background, that was my interest, and I just happened to get a job with a franchise company. At that time, I didn't even really know what a franchisor was, but the first few days sitting down with the FTC rule on franchising and trying to read it. But I was there for 5 years, and it was a great way to learn franchising, being in-house in the franchise company, working with franchisees. It was just a great learning ground. That particular company was bought out 5 years later and moved to California. And one of the other attorneys on staff and I started our practice in 1991 and decided to be a franchise law firm. And we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. So I think it's a fascinating area of the law, and it's been interesting and a great ride. And sometimes you just kind of fall into things. You don't necessarily learn them in school, but you can learn them on the job.
I grew up in a blue-collar family in urban Chicago. My father was an auto mechanic. My mother was a homemaker. And I spent a lot of time with my dad in the garage, working on cars, at his facilities working on cars. Coming to Midas actually was coming full circle for me back into automotive, which is something that I've always loved. I graduated from DePaul University in 1982 and was fortunate enough to get a job with Coopers & Lybrand, who's now part of PricewaterhouseCoopers, as an auditor, and I did that for 11 years. Worked mostly with retail clients. So when I decided to go into industry, it was with a retailer at the time. I became the CFO of a public retail chain. Did that for a few years and then decided to do a startup. Me and a couple of friends started a specialty grocery business in Chicago. We ended up building, I think, 18 stores over the course of 5 years. Business did about $100 million, and that came completely out of the ground. That was hiring the first employees, finding office space, literally doing everything. So I have a lot of appreciation, having done that, for what these guys do on a regular basis down in the smaller business. But that business ultimately failed, and this was 1999. The internet was alive and going, and just about anybody who had an idea could get financing. And having just gone through a failed startup, I decided I had offers from companies that were in the internet business and from Midas. And because of my love for cars and my background with cars, I was able to walk in and talk to the people intelligently about their business, given my childhood. So I accepted the job with Midas, and it's been a wonderful experience. It was my first franchise business, but franchisees are our customers. They pay our salaries, and they're also very innovative. They have the freedom to experiment. You mentioned Dairy Queen. I know that in the case of McDonald's, our CEO is the former president of McDonald's. And he has all kinds of stories about how most of the sandwiches that are sold today were invented by franchisees. And in our business, we take all the great ideas that franchisees come up with, package them up, and repeat them back out to our franchisees. So it's really a very good way to do business.
Well, I too fell into franchising sort of by accident. It wasn't really my plan at all, but here I am. I graduated from law school. I went to work for a law firm for several years, and I enjoyed that. But I had a friend that worked in the Consumer Fraud Bureau of the Attorney General's office, and she used to talk about all her cases, and you know, she just made it sound so interesting to get to talk to consumers on the phone and to help them with any problems that they were having with the business, and to, you know, all sorts of new issues every day. She never knew what she was going to come in to deal with. And so I ended up applying for a job there, and I worked in the Consumer Fraud Bureau for several years, and then there was an opening in our Franchise Bureau. And I hadn't really given a lot of thought to the Franchise Bureau or what it did. It was upstairs. I had no idea. But my boss came and talked to me about it, and she said, look, she said, it's very similar to consumer fraud. We're, you know, helping folks make investment decisions beforehand, and you're dealing with problems that they encounter after the fact. And so I gave it a try, and I have been splitting my time ever since, both in the Consumer Fraud Bureau and in the Franchise Bureau, and just really enjoy what I get to do. It's still every day. I have no idea what I'm going to come in to face in my voicemail and my emails. It's an adventure every day, so I've enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you very much. Let me ask a question. We'll start with the franchisees and franchisors, and the counselors, of course, are free to weigh in as they see fit. Franchising is a situation where you're operating under a shared trademark. The Dairy Queen operates under the Big Kiss, the golden arches of McDonald's. At one time, the giant sign of the Holiday Inn, the big sign. They're operating under the shared trademark. So I'm curious to what the Midas yellow and black sign as well. I'm curious to what extent you feel dependent upon your fellow franchisees, to what extent you see yourself as part of a team, to what extent you see them as competitors. And in the same way, how do you manage, how do you interact with your colleagues to try to make sure that that brand name stays as valuable today or even grows in value as as businesses move forward together?
Want me to start?
Yes.
There were several questions in there, but.
I'm trying to give you an opportunity to pick your favorite and go from there.
Sure, okay, all right. Very dependent upon the trademark, very dependent upon the fellow franchisee. I guess you could say we're probably as strong as our weakest link in the chain, as in the business that we are in is subject to scrutiny. It's subject to trust from the consumer. When that trust is violated, there are repercussions across an entire system. Sears has found that, Midas has found that over the years. And so you are absolutely at the mercy of hoping that your fellow franchisees are doing as good a job as you are, that they're honest with people, that they're fair with people. And you do have some protection in that the company can help enforce that, but still we're independent. I mean, we are independently owned, we're independently managed, and unfortunately, all aspects of involvement in the business. Some people are passively involved, others are the counter every day and are, you know, writing the work orders and seeing the customer and involved in that way. So I would say that probably I'm partial to smaller towns and smaller operators, but the 1 and 2 shop operators probably in most cases are closer to what happens in their shops every day. But we have some very good large franchisees that manage their systems well. As far as communication amongst our franchisees, we have a fairly solid franchise association. I happen to be serving this year as the president of the International Midas Dealers Association. And we just had a conference last week in Miami. So we get together once a year. We have seminars and discussions, and we can socialize, and we can trade stories, and we can share I don't ever see them as a competitor because traditionally we are geographically separated. So I don't know that that's really an issue. I would sooner ask a fellow franchisee 500 miles away than I would maybe lean on somebody in the SCORE chapter locally because of the involvement that we have, and I can probably find somebody with almost the same problem that I have, a few hundred miles away that I can bounce that off of. I have days when I think I'm having a bad day, and I'll call one of my friends in the big city and let him tell me a couple of his stories, and suddenly I'm having a pretty good day, So, it is nice because our association allows for a lot of interaction. Midas is good about having events, advertising meetings and things to get people together. We have, our franchisor has a newspaper they put out and help publicize that from successes from other franchisees. So there's a lot to learn from fellow franchisees. I would say way more of an asset than a burden.
Fellow franchisees? Oh, absolutely. I'm on an advertising committee in St. Louis for the St. Louis DMA, a member of the Mid-State Store Owners Association, which represents stores mainly in central downstate Illinois, but has associate members in Missouri and Indiana as well. And the advertising committee in St. Louis meets monthly, and I live for those meetings. I mean to tell you, to be able to go to meetings and talk to fellow franchisees is, to me, vital. I mean, you've got to stay in contact with these guys because I guarantee you, as much as it might seem like a love fest between the franchisee and the franchisor, it's not always that way, I guarantee you. As a matter of fact, Dairy Queen has I wouldn't call it a rival association, but in a sense it is. It's an organization that we're also a member of that's called DQOA, Dairy Queen Operators Association, which fights for your rights as Dairy Queen operators. There are issues that come up on a regular basis that involve the corporate level and the store operators, and they don't always quite seem eye to eye. So there's a lot to being involved with your fellow franchisees and making sure that you're up to date and that you know what's going on. It's vitally important. And no, they aren't competition. Other Dairy Queen operators, like you said, the stores are protected by their contract from allowing other Dairy Queens to open up right across the street or in the same community, or there's territorial rights that are involved with your contract. As far as the recognition of the logo, from what I understand, the Dairy Queen logo next to the golden arches is the most recognizable symbol in marketing today. In other words, if you saw the Dairy Queen logo, the ellipse, without the word DQ or Dairy Queen on it, you would instantly know what it means. You would know that it's a Dairy Queen logo. Same way with the McDonald's. If you see the golden arches, you know it's a McDonald's. So that signage, that protection, that security of being under a franchise is vitally important. And again, you're right. We're only as good as our weakest link, because I'm sure everybody's been to a Dairy Queen or a McDonald's or some restaurant that wasn't operated very well, and you have a tendency to avoid that franchise or that store at other communities. So it does carry over. So there's good and bad in that, but for the most part, if the franchisor is doing their part, they keep most of the stores from bringing the rest of the system down. So, yeah, it's important to have that recognition, that instant name recognition, and the ability to the buying power that also comes along with your franchise as well.
I'd like to make one comment on the legal side, talking about the reliance on the brand. If any of you have looked at a franchise agreement, they're pretty onerous and they're pretty one-sided in favor of the franchisor. There's certainly some room for fairness to the franchisee, but as I tell, when I'm representing prospective franchisees, I tell them, you want, in a certain sense, you want that agreement to be one-sided and to be forceful because it's there to protect the brand. You want, the agreement to the franchisor to have the ability to protect, the quality of services that are provided, the quality of the products, because that brand reflects on every franchisee in the system.
I'd say that as the steward of a brand, as the franchisor responsible for maintaining the brand's equity and worth, having franchisees who've invested their personal, in some cases, entire life savings in their store ends up making it easier for us to make sure that customers get good experiences and are well taken care of and aren't cheated. There are plenty of retailers out there who've been in the news. Somebody mentioned Sears earlier, that have done things to consumers at stores, and that reflects on the entire organization, and those were company operated, because the person who's running that store for Sears doesn't have a personal investment in it. But I'm sure that John will do everything he can to take care of his customers. And so we've got a collection of people that have their entire net worth tied up in a business. We're likely to get a better consumer experience as a result of it. Now, for the franchisee, it's sort of a good and bad, because I've got in our case the Oval, which is going to drive traffic that otherwise wouldn't be there, but I am subject to what the guy down the street or across the country is doing. We had a case in California a couple of years ago where the franchisees' shops were mystery shopped by the Bureau of Automotive Repair. California regulates everything, and they regulate automotive repair very tightly. And they sold some services that weren't needed. And the Attorney General splashed his name all over the papers. He was running for governor at the time and made a big deal out of it. And ultimately, the business in that, he had 21 stores, declined by 50%, and other stores in that California area also saw significant decline. So one guy's innocent acts hurt the whole California market, and we ended up having to buy those stores because the Attorney General wanted a fine that was just unbelievable that it couldn't be managed. And we've been investing and losing money in those 21 stores now for 2 years, trying to rebuild the customer trust and the customer base that was there. So it can work really well when you get the brand, but when something bad happens, it hurts everybody.
It might seem unusual to students who see a panel of business practitioners to see attorneys at the table. And one reason that's prominent in the franchising world is that, as a number of our panelists have alluded to, the franchise agreement is grounded in a contract, a relationship between two independent parties, legally independent but economically interdependent parties, the franchisee and the franchisor. Of course, that differs, as Bill remarked, between that and, say, the manager of the local Sears and Sears Incorporated. So, given that the franchise agreement is grounded in a legal contract, what types of disputes have you seen? How have you seen successfully disputes being resolved underneath that contract or outside of that contract? And what role does the law play or the contract play as a final arbiter, if you will, of the relationship between the franchisee and the franchisor? I'm going to ask our attorneys to comment first and then allow our practitioners to continue.
Well, I will say I'm not a litigator, so I don't handle dispute resolution, but obviously see it in my practice and try to help clients resolve it before it goes to litigation. Ultimately, that's best for everybody. I mean, there's a whole host of things that can happen, and I'm sure you can comment on that sort of thing too, but it can be financial failures where they're not, either if they weren't sufficiently capitalized or there's some reason that the business is not taking off and not doing well financially, where then the franchisees stop paying the franchisor. It can be more operational issues where they're not, up to the quality that they should be. So there can be a whole host of things, or there can be franchisees that are intentionally deciding they know a better way to do it and not following the system that they bought into, and using unapproved products or adding on services or products that were not approved. So those are just some examples of things that can happen where there can be some variance from the contract, and then it has to be addressed by the franchisor.
I see in my job a lot of situations where a company has developed a popular business model. They've a restaurant, for example, that's really taken off, and they go to expand that by franchising. And they're really good on the business end of it. They haven't maybe gotten some legal advice on the other end of it. And they've sold a few locations down the road. They haven't completely complied with the franchise laws and requirements, and they maybe haven't thought through how this system is going to work for somebody new coming into the system. It's working really well for them. They knew what they were getting into. They knew the recipes, and they haven't quite given the thought as to how they're going to train new folks and help them get up and running. So I get a lot of calls from folks who bought into these systems saying, I'm not making any money. I want out now. And then I'm, looking back at the beginning of the situation and what happened in the beginning, and they maybe have a contract, they maybe don't, they maybe called it something completely different and thought they were going to void all of the franchise protections, things like that. So that's how I spend a lot of my time dealing with situations like that.
So what actions is the state capable of remedying, and what situations are you less able to bring the state's resources to bear?
Well,
Power of your office is what I'm trying to say.
Sure. In my job, I enforce the Franchise Disclosure Act. I don't represent any franchisees. I represent the people of the state of Illinois. So I can't bring an action specifically on behalf of one franchisee. But when somebody gives me a call, I start looking at their documents and, how the system was formed. And a lot of times, the company the franchisor didn't properly register with us to begin with, as they're required to by law. They didn't put together this disclosure packet in the proper way. Probably a lot of the same things Doris will do up front if somebody's come to them before they bought. But a lot of times I see it after somebody's bought. And basically I have a couple of options. One involves a lawsuit, which is the most common thing I do at that point, or a settlement document, where I can get a rescission for the franchisee. I can get the contract basically unwound, get them out of the business, and get them some money back. Never usually their full investment, but some money back, and a penalty for the state, and some relief that way.
I think it may be helpful to have a little background information. There's a lot of regulation in franchising, and there's a federal franchise law that covers every franchise transaction in anywhere in the country, with a few exceptions if you might have an exemption. So and that requires that franchisors provide you with a franchise disclosure document, and that you would have that at least 14 days before you sign a franchise agreement or pay any money toward a franchise fee. And then there are 14 states that have registration and disclosure laws that on top of that will require some kind of registration and oversight and review in some cases, and get approval before a franchisor can offer and sell franchises in that state. So there is a lot of, and those laws are really there to protect the prospective investors, to protect the franchisees. So you really need to take advantage of that and make sure that you are getting that franchise disclosure document that you are entitled to under the law, that you're getting it in the right time frame, that you have it for the right time frame, that you're getting the most current information, and then use that as part of your tool and your due diligence in deciding whether or not to purchase a franchise and whether this is the right system to become part of.
And that you are hiring an attorney.
One of the
Before you sign the document. Not after.
One of the things that comes to mind that we see in the association, and I've seen it in years past, you mentioned, Kevin, that you have a protected area. Mm-hmm. With Midas, we really don't. We don't have a geographic area that's protected. There's always been a very good cooperation with the company as far as determining whether or not there's the ability to support another location, but it was explained to me early on, and it still holds true today. If Midas felt like I was either not representing the brand well enough, not serving the customers well enough, or that the customer base would support one, they could put one across the street from me. So I always took that as more of a asset than a liability, because I felt like it was some protection for me, in that it was motivating for me to continue to be up to par and run my business the correct way. But we have seen issues over the years where someone felt slighted, or someone felt, imposed upon, or that they were being located, a new shop was being located too close to them. And although our association doesn't get involved necessarily with individual issues, we do try and help clarify some of the policies, and that's one of the things that we do with our association. Our association has a full-time attorney, and that person is our executive director as well. And so it's a pretty good rapport with Bill and Bill's sidekick, who's our attorney, Midas's attorney, and they talk quite often, I think, and most of the time people can work things out without having to spend a lot more money on additional attorneys or having to go to court. But typically, there's a reason why Midas feels there's a good place here for a Midas shop, or in the case of our new co-brand initiative with our Speedy oil change service, a conversion or a co-brand conversion. And so when you start coming into areas where somebody's been there for 30 years, and well, there's going to be one just 3 miles up the road. Well, yeah, there may be, and Midas has done some work to try and make that case before they didn't just drive by and say, hey, there's an empty building, we should put another Midas there. It was a lot more involved in that.
Well, and I think that one of the key things is getting involved with the right franchisor, because you're talking about companies like Midas and Dairy Queen that have been around for decades, and obviously they're doing it right. But there are other new concepts coming out that either they're not fully developed, or they're not really understanding franchising, and they haven't done enough to learn about franchising. And there's people out there that are out to defraud investors. So you really have to make sure that you are with the right system that isn't going to take advantage of somebody and sell one franchise and then sell another one a few blocks down the street a year later that's going to encroach on the sales of the first one.
One of the things that I learned early on was that Midas doesn't make money churning franchises, but there are companies that really do. So you really want to look at that turnover rate and the cost involved in turning the franchise. Ours is very reasonable to sell or transfer a franchise, but in many cases, some of those larger companies and some of those companies that seem to be in high demand, they're very high dollar, and when you get ready to sell it, the next guy has to pay that too, and in some cases a franchise transfer fee as well.
I commend you. You have lots of questions, so let me make sure that I get to it. One of them was about what I would describe as the issue of exclusive territories or putting units too close to another. So I will leave that question as addressed.
Probably franchise agreement specific. I mean, it would be,
Yeah.
ours is not, and I think Kevin's is
Yeah,
protected.
5 miles.
Now, one of the students is asking our franchisees and our counselors, I guess I'll ask the question to the counselors first and then the franchisees second. The counselors are asked, are there laws that prevent a former franchisee from owning a different company in the same industry? And then the question will be about the franchisees starting a business in the same or a similar industry. So counselors, are there laws or other prohibitions that prevent people from owning a different company in the same industry?
In probably 100% of the franchise agreements, you will see non-competition provisions, and that is in there so that the franchisor can protect that proprietary information that they're going to teach you teach you how to operate that business. But those non-competition provisions are going to say that once your franchise is terminated, or at the end of the expiration, if there's a 5-year term, a 10-year term, at the end of the term, and if you don't renew, either way, you're not going to be able to compete with anyone in their system for a certain period of time within a certain geographic radius. And that period of time and the geographic radius can vary from system to system, and there's a lot of variation in state laws, but the majority of the states will enforce non-competition provisions because you have that knowledge in your head, and if you terminate your agreement and you stay in business, you're obviously going to be using still that proprietary information that you learned. So there would be some restriction after termination or expiration.
So let's make the assumption that the franchisee is not in violation of one of those non-compete types of agreements. So the franchisees, has your experience as a franchisee given you the courage and the skill and other necessary qualities to create a startup in some line of business that might be that would not, again, jeopardize the main line of business that you're in now? So maybe a question is, what have you learned about business more generally? And
So could I start another business in another industry or in another field? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, running a business it's about the people. It's about having a good banker or two. And it's about having a process and a product that people want to buy and a margin that will afford you the ability to stay current. I mean, one of the things that people sometimes fail to understand, especially as a consumer, but sometimes even as a business owner, is you have to make money on a transaction. You have to make money in business to stay in business. Just not enough to feed your family, but you have to be able to buy new equipment. You have to be able to pay for things when they break. You have to be able to pay for things when they go wrong. And so, you know, without that profit, you can't do all of those things. But if you have a business, I think I could probably, I think I could take what I have learned and probably run any service-based business that would be successful.
We have many franchisees in our system who own multiple franchise brands. So they'll own a Midas shop, they'll own a Subway franchise. That I think we even have a McDonald's franchisee in the system. What we won't allow is someone who has a Midas shop to own an Amco transmission or a Meineke repair facility. We will not allow that.
I guess I could have another franchise, but I don't want to. I don't have enough time as it is.
This is directed to Mr. Guzik. What made you want to be a franchisor in comparison to the alternative ways that you could be in business, as you say, a fully integrated service provider, or simply a manufacturer and distributor, wholesaler of mufflers, or some other arrangement? What do you see as your key advantages as a franchisor rather than in one of those other organizational forms?
Well, we actually were in the manufacturing and distribution business. Midas got started with a muffler manufacturing plant and a guy who wanted to find places to sell mufflers and exhaust systems. And so he created Midas, which actually is an acronym for Muffler Installation Dealers Associated Services, and brought people together, didn't charge royalties, but sold product and made money selling product. And that worked real well when we were in exhaust and very well when we were in brakes, but when we started getting to these other categories, our ability to manufacture and distribute all of these other products, which franchisees were no longer buying and putting in stock but wanted to buy on a just-in-time basis, became completely impractical. We tried to meet the demand and it almost ended the company. So we got out of the distribution business. We source all of our products now from people who have big distribution systems, big organizations, and can sell to us at very good prices. The question of why we're franchised versus company operated is simply just the business model. There's a company out east called Monroe Muffler and Brake. They own about 600 stores. It's all company operated. They make a lot of money doing it that way, but they have huge capital investments, and the return on their investment is not nearly as good as ours. We have in a franchise virtually no investment. So when our franchisees need new equipment, they have to make it. If they need to repair their building, they have to make that expenditure. We have costs associated with people who help them run their business, but we have no hard dollars invested in equipment or assets. So our return on the royalties they pay is infinitesimal. So it's just a different philosophy. And I would tell you that we do operate some company shops ourselves, but we're just not as good as our franchisees are. Franchisees run better shops, probably across all industries, than a company operation does because of the
I'm going to need a
ownership.
copy of this tape.
Well, one thing I would add too is, I think the franchising, a franchise company, you have a whole lot of different experiences you can have inside the franchise company. It's a company that has to do marketing to develop the brand. It's a company that has to have customer service to the customers as well as to the franchisees. it may be in product distribution, you've got the legal aspects, so it's a really very interesting type of company to be involved in.
One of our students asks, when someone wants to own a business, why do they think to purchase a franchise? And I guess this is getting to your question, you're getting your response, but are there an obvious, instead of starting their own business, is there an obvious disadvantage to franchising rather than starting an independent business?
I'll take that one. You know, if, let's say that you wanted to get into the automotive repair business, you'd wonder, okay, well, what size building should I get? How many bays? What sort of lifts should I buy? What kind of equipment do I need? How much should I pay in rent? How should I price my products? What should I have in inventory? Those are questions that if you don't have a franchisee that has a business format, that you have to sort of figure out on your own. It's a lot easier to come to someone who has experience and will tell you the size of the building, the specifications, what colors to paint it, how big the letters on the sign should be, everything from that down to the forms you need to have. And so it's a way to get into business. We like to say that franchisees are in business for themselves, but not by themselves, right? So they've got the safety net of the franchisor who's looking out into the long term, trying to develop the long-term view of the company, and has the resources to maintain a current business format. So you pay for that in terms of paying royalties, but you get the benefit of a brand that people recognize, in our case, a national brand, and you automatically get customers as a result of it. If I opened up Bill's Auto tomorrow, I wouldn't see nearly the traffic that I would see if I opened up a Midas shop. And so the yin and the yang is that you pay royalties, but you get all this knowledge.
And one of the, looking at it from the flip side, you really have to look at what is right for you. I've heard a number of franchisor clients say that they would not want to accept a true entrepreneur as a franchisee. Because they're the ones that want to do it their own way. They're going to come up with some creative ways to change what you're doing and go off on their own, and then that's going to be a problem. So you have to be prepared to be under that, that oversight from the franchisor, to commit to the time commitment. You're committing to a term of 5, 10, 15 years. So that's some of the, the flip side against the, great advantages that there are in franchising.
I looked also at the ability to sell my business someday, to transition out of it. And many times when you build a business, especially a family-owned business, you've either got to have, another Dairy Queen owner in the mix, or somebody in the family that wants to take that over. Many times you would end up financing your own retirement, or by loaning the money to your children or whoever. So I really felt like, and still feel like, that a national name would be easier for me to move when the time came for me to either step aside or transition away from running it. Whereas I have a lot of friends that have built very, very successful businesses, but they are centered around what they do, and probably tomorrow they would be hard pressed to find someone that would actually buy them for what they're really worth, or what they create in income for that person. Whereas I think that when I want to sell mine, Midas will have people that they'll help vet, and they'll make sure that not only are my employees taken care of, but my customers are continuing to take care of.
Right, I would think that the back end value of your investment over the years is much safer with a brand name, Dairy Queen. The blue sky that goes along with Dairy Queen. What does that mean? Well, everybody knows what Dairy Queen is and what it has to offer, and the product line. So the value of your business with the franchise name attached to it is Dairy Queen's much more valuable at the end of the day than Tom's Curly Q. It retains its value, I think.
One of our students has asked a very specific question about this moment, this exit moment or liquidity event, selling the business. If you have a successful franchise, do you have the right to sell it for what the market will bear, or, and I quote, are you dictated to by the franchisor?
The market value, whatever your
Whatever a willing buyer can agree with
right.
a willing seller.
Yeah, your franchisor has no involvement in that part of it. At least at Dairy Queen, they don't.
The only involvement that the franchisor would have would be as if your buyer doesn't qualify as a buyer.
Right.
And that is obviously for the protection of the brand. The last thing they want to do is have somebody come in there and fail because they're undercapitalized or not properly positioned. Maybe they're not the kind of person that can run a business. So there's some protection there for the brand. But no, I think we could negotiate our own deal and sell the business for what it's worth.
Now, the franchisor can, if the contract dictates, enforce modernization clauses. In other words, if your facility doesn't meet their modern new building design, before you sell it and transfer the franchise, you're going to have to reinvest in that business and bring it up to their codes and standards. And in some cases, in our case at Jerseyville, we're not planning on selling the store, but we're going to go ahead with that in mind. At some point in time, we're eventually going to sell it, that we need to have the newest, latest building design. And I'm going to go as far in debt next spring as I was the day I bought the business. And, you know, that prospect is a bit scary, but, you know, that they can control that part of it and have a bearing on what the business is worth, not what you're going to sell it for.
Yeah, the typical franchise agreement has a list of conditions that have to be met in order for you to be able to transfer your franchise and to get approval from the franchisor. You're right, the franchisor is typically not involved in the value of the business, but for one, you would typically have to be in compliance with your agreement. You know, if you haven't paid your royalties, or if there may be some unsatisfactory operational issues, you're going to have to cure those. You will have to get approval of the buyer. That buyer will have to conduct training. As was said, oftentimes there might be a requirement to remodel, and there's typically a transfer fee as well. So each particular franchise agreement will have specified conditions you have to meet in order to get final approval for that sale to go through.
I'm not sure I should say this was an assistant attorney general here, but we do help buyers and sellers get to prices that make sense. There are a lot of times buyers are willing to pay way more than market value, and it'll be financed by the seller, and we'll say, let's look at your business plan here. You can't cash flow at this kind of a number. You're going to be out of business in 6 months or a year. And so we work with the buyer. Sometimes he reduces the price. Sometimes he extends the financing terms. So we do look out for buyers and sellers, and just to make sure that whoever's going in is going to be successful or has a better chance of success.
One of our finance students has asked us, and I'm going to actually quote it because I know I want to quote the question because I know the answer is sophisticated. Do you have any projections for what I can make in a franchise? What is my expected break even, and at what point in time should I expect to achieve this?
I guess we need to know how hard they want to work.
So the first answer is always, hard work is a prerequisite for success in anything. And so the upper limit, the minimum is going to require hard work. Beyond that, how would you add to what the upside might be or the downside might be to a franchise opportunity or operation?
Well, again, I think it depends on the market. It depends on the line of product that would be involved. I mean, there are some franchises out there that, and I'm guessing there's probably somebody at the other end of the table that can speak to this. But there's probably some franchises out there that really, at the end of the day, the person that owns it isn't really making much more than minimum wage for all the hours that they're putting in. And then there's some that are very lucrative, and then there's a lot of them that are here in between. That if you work hard and have a good banker and keep him happy, that you and he lets you grow as you need to grow, you can do well. But it's not. There's no guarantees, and I don't think the franchisor is going to guarantee any amount of return. I don't think they're going to represent that, and I wouldn't expect them to, because I think that it would be really up to you to look at the market, because we have Midas shops that are in small markets and that only do a few $100,000 a year, and we have Midas shops in large markets that do $2 or $3 million a year. So I mean, there's a huge difference in the profit structure of those two stores. So there's a lot of variables there.
we avoid earnings claims like the plague, right? Because somebody's looking at buying a Midas franchise, and we say, oh, you should do about $700,000 in sales and make about $100,000, and they don't, well, guess what? They're going to be suing us. So we're very deliberate in not making any sorts of earning claim, other than to say what the volume, sales volume, if it's an existing store, has been historically. Now, when John's selling his store to a third party, whatever he says is not regulated by the FDD. He can, as a buyer, a willing seller, work with the buyer, and they can say whatever they want, but we have to stay out of that.
Under the franchise laws, the franchisor has the option of providing information to prospective franchisees about what the franchisees are doing, historical information on their potential sales, net profits, whatever, but they do not have to provide that information. Last I saw, and maybe you know the percentages about, I think it's increasing, the number of franchisors that are actually putting that information in their franchise disclosure document, but either that or they rely on prospective franchisees going and talking to the franchisees directly to get a sense of what people are making.
We did some research a couple years ago and looked through all of the files that are, all of the franchisors that are registered with us, and it was about 40% were making some type of earnings claim. And I was really surprised that it was that high.
Didn't used to be.
Yeah.
I did that in the state of Maryland about 20 years ago, and the number was about 20%. This is a specific part of the document that actually gives you an income statement, a profit and loss statement. I went further actually and analyzed those and broke them down and made them into a common financial and reporting structure, and was therefore, and with some assumptions, was able to construct a common income statement across 73 distinct franchise chains, and was then able to compare those to both the wages of employees or store managers in the same industry, so it would have been auto repair or restaurants, and also within other independent businesses, that is, say, independent businesses from published financial statements of independent businesses. In both cases, franchise chains did better. That is to say that the franchisee was making more money than he would have as a manager of a store in a similar, of a unit in a similar industry. And by the same token, the business, that is to say the franchised business, was worth more than an independent business. Now this was again from relatively established chains, such as Dairy Queen or Midas, and they were not actually part of my study. But it did suggest that the power of the brand name, the power of the technology did translate into dollars and cents into people's pockets. Dollars and cents are not the only reason to choose your livelihood or your lifetime. So, but it is worth keeping in mind.
I might add too that that is the one big variable in that equation is your level of involvement in the actual business. If you're going to be the hands-on manager and owner of the Midas shop or the Dairy Queen or whatever it is, you're going to make a lot more money than if you pay someone else to run it for you. So you're going to be taking, if you're going to pay a manager, you're taking that right out of the bottom line, and you're going to be giving that to someone else and hope they run it the way you want to run it. So it is a big variable there.
Yeah. It's certainly not a get-rich-quick scheme. I mean, first 5 years, we didn't make money. We were lucky to stay in business. Next 5 years, we started to break even. After the 15th year, we started showing a profit. So and even today, it's still a dogfight day in and day out. It's a penny at a time in the restaurant business. So if you're planning on making money hand over fist quickly, probably not going to happen.
If it says it's a get-rich-quick scheme, it's not.
Yeah.
I
Avoid it.
rely on my
red
counselor
flag.
here to affirm that, but I think that's for sure.
It's for sure.
One of our students has asked a question. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. We live in an era where there are lots of changes going on, internationalization, globalization, technology changes, and so forth. I'm curious about whether there has, in your own experience as a franchisor or franchisee, if there's been a threat, an underlying threat to the business, whether that's arisen from technical changes, regulatory changes, changes in consumer preferences, consumer tastes. In your experience, how did your company, how did Midas, how did Dairy Queen, how did someone with whom you provided counsel, how did they deal with this change as a system, and were they successful?
Midas went through something several years ago where when we transitioned from a muffler and brake company, and mainly mufflers, When technology on the automobile changed and the manufacturers of the original equipment manufacturers of the cars started making the exhaust systems out of stainless steel, we went from an 18-month to 30-month replacement of a muffler to 9 or 10 years. And many of these cars go to the salvage yard after 15 years with the original muffler still in the car. So Midas had to diversify. We had to go into these other areas. We had to make changes in our product offering because the exhaust business, which was once all of our business, is now less than 10% of my business.
Yeah, the one advantage we have that we like to tell prospective franchisees is that we are not a business that can be made obsolete by the internet.
Right.
Right? Most anything can be sold over the internet, but service businesses can't. So we think that automotive repair, it's a $153 billion business in the U.S. It's here to stay for a long time.
What research would you recommend would be done before you choose to purchase a franchise? And are there particular sources or websites that you would recommend for reference either for purchasing a franchise or an existing operation?
I would suggest actually working in that field or working at a Dairy Queen in our case. I mean, that practical experience can't be, is invaluable. That's the research that I would do. I mean, you know, how do you know if you even like it or not, unless you've actually participated in it?
There is the famous McDonald's phrase, you should have ketchup in your veins. Do you think that you should be interested in how important is it to be interested in the business or the service that you're providing as opposed to the business of it, shall we say?
Well, you have to want to succeed and do a good job. I mean,
Okay.
absolutely,
You better like people.
yes.
I was going to say, that's what I tell most of my prospective franchisee clients. It's not about, you know, the ice cream or the mufflers. It's about marketing and selling, and you've got to be comfortable with that, or else you shouldn't get into a franchise. A couple of sources of information. There's a lot of online directories that list franchising, and will have kind of a little synopsis about different franchises. You know, if you don't know what store to go, you know, work in for a while, if you want to kind of get an idea of what's out there, those are good sources. There's also franchise broker networks that actually work with candidates to assess their skills and see what might be a good match for them for franchising. So there's different resources. And then once you hone in on a couple of franchise systems and meet with them, you request their franchise disclosure document, and that's the legal document that gives all the required legal disclosures. It will give you a lot of background about the company and the officers and litigation history and bankruptcy and what it's going to cost to open the business and what your obligations are going to be and what the franchisor has to do for you. So that's a lot of information that's you really need to look at once you get real serious about a particular franchise.
I want to turn the tables just a moment. One of the students has asked not about being a franchisee, but about being a franchisor. I have a great idea to begin a franchise in the fashion retail or the retail market, and let's just abstract from that, whatever this great idea is in. But I don't have enough money to begin. What do I do? How do I help to become a franchisor? How do I build up my business and my idea? Where do I start? My business plan is done. Where do I go next?
Well, I represent a number of startup franchisors and also work with franchise consultants that provide some of the business counsel for companies looking to franchise. But typically, I know that franchise consultants recommend that you establish your business and operate it for a good year or two and find out if it's viable. Is it financially viable? And then you have to look at it on top of what money you can make operating that business, but if you're sharing some of that revenue with a franchisor and paying royalties, is it continuing to be viable? As well as, can it be systematized? Can you train somebody to do the same thing that you're going to do? So really the groundwork is starting the business itself, operating it, and knowing that you're looking to go into franchising. My suggestion would be, start working on that manual from day one. When you're training your employees or you're setting up your systems, put it in writing, and you can later refine it if you do want to get into franchising.
Well, I think having the demand is the most important part. You've got to create a demand for that clothing that you want to franchise, and if that demand is there and you're not able to keep up with that demand, that's when you'll probably start thinking about franchising, getting where there's demand outside of your area or more demand than you can handle. You need help with that product getting it out. That's the key, is you've got to have, it's like Pinkberry, the yogurt store in California that started, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago as in West Hollywood, California. A little two-window walk-up, a different type of yogurt. It's a soft-serve product, but it's I don't know, there's a couple in Chicago now. I don't know if anybody's tried that. But it's a tart, tangy type of product that just caught on like wildfire. And there are now hundreds of Pinkberry stores throughout the country. A franchise success story based on demand.
John and Bill, I want to say one of the students wants to help you out because they have a question. Do you think that Midas should begin a towing service? Have you ever thought about starting that? And what's your response?
We have franchisees that offer towing.
May I ask you, they obviously regard it as successful?
I think it's a sideline to their business. I mean, I don't know that it's a profit-generating part of their business.
They're not prohibited from doing so either.
No. But the amount of towing that I would require, I'm better off, in my case, just to sub it out, subcontract it out on a as-needed basis. 15 or 20 tows a month wouldn't really justify me having a person and a vehicle and all that liability driving around out there on the street. And I'm not sure for most dealers it would be advantageous, but there are some that have made it work.
One of our students has asked a specific question as well, which is the franchisor has told the franchisee, prospective franchisee, they don't have enough startup capital, but the franchisee has investors ready. The franchisor still declines them. What should the franchisee do? So there's sort of two questions there. One is the specific question. The other is, how do you deal successfully with the franchise application process? And how can you make that a success to actually come out at the end as a successful franchisee of a Midas, Dairy Queen, or another system?
Well, if somebody doesn't have the startup capital but has investors willing to make the investment, then they'd have to be parties to the franchise agreement in our system. The people who sign the franchise agreement have to sign personal guarantees that they will pay whatever monies come due, one way or another. And if there's a third party that's going to help finance this, whether it's an investor or a bank, we'd have to see that the money was in the business and it was available to spend on the business. So it would just be the organization between the investor and how that money gets invested in the business. So if you had a parent that wanted to give you the money, that's fine. Have your parent write us a letter that they're going to give you the money and show us the liquidity in a bank statement that says you have the money to do it. And then we will only close if they come through with their investment.
Fair enough.
And we actually see some of that when people are in the position where they're trying to transition out of the business, where they, the former franchisee may end up helping to finance part of the deal or, signing, that guarantee for a certain period of time to get the deal to work, because it does, they're trying to protect our brand, and the last thing we want is a dealer to get in there and not be able to make it, because now you've got an empty storefront in a town where there was once a thriving Midas shop, and you have a lot of customers with that warranty in their hand that now can't get it serviced. So
I'd like to ask a public policy question at a broader level. Job creation is really the highest challenge, I think, facing America these days. And I'm curious whether our panelists think that franchising can help with job creation, particularly creating not just as franchisees, but as employers, what challenges they see as employers in creating new employees, and does it create employees with a future of their own? Are these good jobs with a future that they can create through franchising? Is franchising part of job creation, the challenge of job creation in America? Part of the solution?
well, I would say it's part of the puzzle. Obviously, you can't create a franchise or open a business where there isn't demand for that particular service or goods. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, I think, to a certain extent. If people don't have the money to fix their car, and they're deferring maintenance, and they're putting off things that need to be done, but they don't have to do. The demand is not going to be as strong. When the economy gets bad, people put off their sweet treats.
It's easy to do, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so, you know, I don't know what else.
In my opinion, small business is the growth engine for the economy. It isn't as though General Motors and IBM are going to go on hiring sprees and add a lot of jobs. Job creation will mostly come from small businesses. Frankly, franchise businesses have a higher rate of success as a small business. There's a statistic out there that's somewhat dated now. I think that 50% of businesses fail within their first 2 years of new businesses. Well, in most franchise businesses, it's nowhere near 50% because you've got a proven business model. So I think franchising could be a great creator of jobs.
I have one last question, and it comes from you, the students. I want to give each of our panelists a chance to respond. What's the best advice that you have or that you've learned that you can share with us to help an aspiring individual get his foot in the door of the franchising world? What's the best advice you can offer? So let's work our way back down the table. Give everyone a final word, shall we say, about the best advice you can imagine.
Well, I don't know about advice, but I do know that if you're going to get into business for yourself and have a staff and provide a service or a product, understand that as the boss, your number one problem, day in and day out, is going to be your employees, bar none. Piece of equipment breaks down, you can beat it with a hammer if you want to. But when it's little Susie or Tori not able to make it work on a Friday night, guess who's going to have to take care of the problem? And you can't hammer a kid. You've got to figure out a way to deal with those issues and problems. Employees are people, and they have feelings, and you have to. That part of the business, for me, was the biggest learning curve, and still is today. Kids today are different than they were 20 years ago. So learning to deal with employees and their problems and the things associated with that, if you're a good people person from the get-go, it will be of great benefit to you. So that's my bit of advice. Be aware that employees can be problematic, but you need them. You've got to have them.
Well, I would have to say that I agree with Kevin on that. You better like people. I said it earlier. You better like people if you're going to be in a business that is facing customers, facing employees. You better have the ability to have some compassion for the situations, but at the same time be firm, because people will walk all over you if you don't. And I would have to say that that would probably be the key to it. If you don't want to be reliant upon other people, then you might want to find some other sector to make a living in, because you will absolutely be at the mercy of your employees and your customers. Really, I mean, you have to care about both. We kind of joke it'd be a great business if it wasn't for the people. Fixing the car is the easy part.
Yes.
I guess my advice would be in getting into franchising is just how I did it. You get a job with a franchisor, get a job with a franchisee, and have your ears to the ground and understand and start to learn franchising as a business model, and look at it from the different perspectives and see if it's something for you.
Yeah, I'd say that some of our best franchisees worked for us as the franchisor and then decided to buy stores because they understand the organization, where to get help, what the people who failed did, what the people who are succeeding are doing. So there's a lot of knowledge that way to be learned as well.
I agree with that. The biggest problem I see are people that have gotten into something without doing their homework. And I think that's a great way to, work in the business, get some experience that way, talk to other folks that are involved in the business. Just make sure you know what you're getting into before you get into it.
I want to thank our panelists for their expertise and for the education that they've afforded me and they've accorded you. I've learned a lot. I'm going to just hit a couple summary points that you just heard, but first of all, success in any business, franchising is no exception, is going to be based on your hard work. But also you have to be willing to build a team. You have to be willing to work hard, work with other people. You also have to like people enough to enjoy being in a service business and being in front of people. One of the things I liked, and you saw a nice live example today, was that one of our panelists, rather than asking whether towing was good business, he started to work the numbers in his head. Seems like I don't see the margin there. That's a good lesson. There's lots of attractive things in the world, lots of things that need to be done, but you can't necessarily make money at it. That's a great lesson. So be sure to be able to work with the numbers and do the numbers, as well as wondering whether it's just a good idea. Finally, do your homework. Your homework is doing those numbers, but also getting good counsel and good advice before any serious business decision, or for that matter, any serious decision in general. For these and so many other lessons, I'm grateful to our panel, and can we show them our appreciation, please?